As a classroom teacher, one of the biggest challenges I find is to come up with new and different and engaging tasks each semester. I like to challenge my students by offering them tasks that extend the core learnings in each unit. At the same time, I want the tasks to be current and relevant to them. I hope you will find the critical thinking task that I've developed here to be one that you find worthwhile and doable. Learning about the diversity of living things in detail is clearly a struggle for many students. Our common complaint is that there is so much to learn, so much content to cover, so much vocabulary to learn and memorize. This task takes the critical thinking challenge model and melds it with the field study experience, which is part of the diversity unit in grade 11 university biology. The specific task that I have included is my final ultimate package. To be honest, I have not always used it as written. This last semester I ran out of time, so I used pieces of it without having students write a major report. Instead, they did an oral presentation of their ideas and plans. So what I'm saying is, don't be turned off by the magnitude of the task. Instead, I encourage you to make it your own. Read it all through first, and then take those ideas that work for you and for your students. Working with the Critical Thinking Consortium on this project, one thing that I learned was how important asking the right question is in the right way. I know that sometimes it is just easier and takes much less time to lead students in their thinking. But in my experience now, I can see that the added value for both the students and for me when I step back and let the students take ownership and discover at their own pace and in their own way. There is a huge value in allowing students to discuss a problem without setting a time limit, establishing the groups they will work with, and allowing them to, in an ongoing basis, meet, discuss, and change their plans. I love teaching this unit because I can highlight all those living things that students seldom see or even know exist. Enough of an introduction. Let me tell you about this task. The unit focused is diversity of living things. The overarching inquiry: can the understanding of biodiversity help us to analyze the impact of man's actions? Learning goal is explain why biodiversity is important to maintaining viable ecosystems. Analyze the effects of various human activities on the diversity of living things. This comes from the Ministry Expectations for SBI 3U. I have set up the task as a culmination that pulls together a field study, hopefully you're able to conduct one, and all the overall expectations for the unit. I take my classes to a local watershed and conduct a macroinvertebrate study. If this is not possible, there is a list of environmental hotspots throughout the province included in the resources. Hopefully you can find one of them that would be relevant to your classes. The task that I'm setting out is called a conservation triage. Because I use a local watershed at my site, my event was a flood. This flood occurred from a burst power dam, which impacted a highly diverse ecological hotspot quite close to where my students live. Large number of species I outline are impacted, both animals and plants. My class was given the task where they were put in charge. They had to prepare an effective action plan for a conservation triage team. They had to consider who they were going to save, both right away as well as later, and who and what they were going to leave. They had to organize by priority, and they had to determine what remediation action had to be organized and then work out an implementation plan. Well, that was their assignment. I chose a triage plan for the basis of the task to engage my students, and it worked. To my surprise, even the students that like to sit back and to let others take the lead, or the ones that I found struggle with formal tests, all showed enthusiasm, and each one of them went well beyond what was expected. Well, where to begin? My first comment is don't wait until the end of the unit. Start on day one. Your students will be excited and engaged throughout the unit if they know what to look for and have the opportunity to build their skills in a really defined way. I have suggested on day one of the unit using a local or current event. There is always something happening in the news. Forest fires, floods, etc. Any of that will get this ball rolling. Get the students talking to and listening to each other, assessing ideas and considering alternative thinking. This sets the tone for the unit. Everyone has an idea. All should be heard and considered. After about 10 minutes, I turn from the what has happened to what was done. Now students can discuss the response to the event. If it is not documented, then let them consider what should the response be. This is where I introduce the idea of a triage. This is an emergency response team approach. Right from the beginning, I suggest you promote accountable talk. Push your students to clarify and explain their ideas, provide justification for their thoughts and proposals, recognize and challenge misconceptions, and demand evidence from peers for claims and arguments. Hopefully, this will promote student self-motivation and sustaining conversations. I encourage student-generated questions. Try to do this each day as you introduce a new concept or review a previously taught concept. I encourage my students to keep a journal throughout the unit. This will help them construct meaning from what they discuss and what they are learning. To make this active learning, tell them to keep the entries narrative and centered around their own questions. This will make it purposeful and they hopefully will use it. The journal suggested is for them. You can check it out periodically. My experience was that my students came to me to show me what they were thinking and planning. They were very excited. There's no limit to the benefits of taking students outdoors to collect and classify organisms, whether they are looking at leaves or at organisms, anything from frogs to macroinvertebrates. The activity itself brings the unit to life. Once the students have experienced this, they are now truly engaged and ready to complete their triage plan. Simulations can probe student thinking and modify preconceptions, especially when combined with this hands-on field experience. I try to use both whenever possible. If students are struggling to complete this task, I suggest you explicitly walk them through the triage process as a whole class, using a disaster not previously discussed. First, demonstrating a think aloud approach, helping them to organize the information in an appropriate graphic organizer, then give each small group a card with a focus statement that relates to the disaster. After the students have read the statement, they come back together and you could facilitate adding their information to the whole class mind map. Following this, I hope the students, when they revisit their own problem, can extend and apply these strategies. I have outlined how I approach setting up this unit in the resources. I must be honest and say that I sometimes strayed from what I wanted to do. But I did find that when I kept a journal myself of how I wanted to phrase questions and what I needed to do and when I needed to step back and let the students take over, things went a lot smoother. I have also tried to give some suggestions, some probing questions, a checklist for students, sample task assignment handout, to get you started. Please don't take my suggestions as a lesson plan. For this unit, they are only a framework and hopefully will inspire some really creative thinking. I have also included a couple exemplars from my students, one from the first time I tried the task and a couple others from the following year. Feedback from the students was unanimously positive. They felt they were challenged and it was a lot of work, but most asked if they could do this again in the next unit. I hope you find this resource helps your planning and provides a framework and opportunities for your students to reflect on and discuss the big questions facing us. Good luck.